So Silverstone sent over a couple of boxes for an ultra portable, well, I don't know if ultra portable technically qualified. This is not the smallest case on the market. No one's claiming that it is. Super portable, let's go with that. It is going to be a very compact case, and it will house some pretty powerful components, and it will be going in my living room downstairs. I haven't had a PC down there for a very long time, and now that we've been hooked up with an LG OLED TV, which we'll be talking about in a sponsored video coming up soon on the channel, I wanted to build something that, you know, could drive that kind of like 4K 120 hertz refresh rate that you get on a lot of these modern OLED panels. So Silverstone was gracious enough to send over a very small case that will fit in my entertainment setup, as well as a power supply and an AIO. We've got other parts I'm going to show you in a second. It's going to be a pretty beefy build. Stay with me. To get rid of that annoying activation watermark, hop on over to VIP SCD Key and purchase a Windows 10 Pro OEM key for fractions of the price of retail. Just use a secure payment method like PayPal, receive your key in seconds, and activate your OS here. Bye-bye watermark. And be sure to use our new offer code SKGS for a sweet discount. So this here is the SilverStone SG13B -C. I'm pretty sure that's the full name of this particular model. And the -C is referring to the inclusion of a Type-C port down here at the bottom right. If your motherboard doesn't support Type-C and you want two Type-A ports, they have that variant, I believe, as well. It's a very subdued, just clean looking, cube style ITX case. And it'll look really good in our entertainment setup, mixed in with our receiver down below and our one of my center speaker. I have a clip center speaker off to the right in this config here. And I really like the way that this case blends in with that hardware. So somehow we're supposed to be able to fit an ITX motherboard in here, a full-size graphics card, 2-slot, a 120mm AIO, and a full-size, what looks like full-size power supply, standard length PSU. Silverstone says it can be done. I'm not sure. I did panic kind of last minute, asked Noctua to send out a low profile AM4 cooler just in case. Thank you, Noctua, for sending that out. If I don't end up using it here, obviously it'll be in some other build at some point in the channel. So with the case out of the way, let's talk about what else we're gonna attempt to fit in here. I honestly, I'm not seeing it, but apparently it can be done. So let's give it a shot. So this is it. Yeah, this is everything. This seems kind of underwhelming. These boxes are fairly small, but it makes sense. It's a small form factor build. What do you know? So we've got a Ryzen 5 5600X in here. So the latest Zen 3 architecture is going to be great for driving those higher refresh rates that we can get with our display. It's going to be a 120 Hz display, remember, so up to 120 FPS. And we want to try to cap that out. You don't want to be limited by your CPU, so that's why I've gone with Zen 3 here. We have an ASRock Phantom B550 Gaming ITX. This I have been sitting on for a good while. Sorry, ASRock. Thanks for being patient with me. It's finally going into the build that I intended it to go into in the first place. We have a PF120 here. This is a 120mm all-in-one liquid cooler. Again, this is the thing that I'm not too sure about yet. We'll see if it fits. We also have a 750 watt power supply over there from Silverstone. I'm not sure if that's SFX. Yeah, so I think the case, it looks like the case supports full-on like ATX power supplies, but going with the SFX form factor will probably give us a bit more space, which I'm sure Silverstone accounted for, so that's cool. You have 32 gigs, two 16 gig sticks, 3600 megahertz a piece, so that's really good for Zen 3. And then the last enigma, this graphics card. So the card, when installed in this case, will actually sit like so, from front to back, so we're gonna be depth dependent here. The card will slot directly into the ITX motherboard, which is nice. We don't need a riser cable, but here's the issue. So if I line up the card with the rear slots, I'm pretty sure we can't fill in space past this line here where the front panel is divided from the remainder of the chassis. And we are right there on the edge, folks. So this 2080 Super might just be a tad too big. And if that is the case, I do have an FE 2060, though I'm not sure if 2060 is gonna be able to drive a 4K 120 Hz display. Maybe with DLSS, that's possible, but then we'll be limited to games that support DLSS. So I'm not entirely sure there, but that is an option. I don't have many cards to play with. I don't have AIB sending me cards every other day, kind of in the same boat as a lot of you. I don't have NVIDIA sending me review samples like they send a lot of other channels as well. I don't know if they particularly like the things that we have to say about the current state of things. That's probably why. But yeah, at the end of the day, I only have a few cards to play with, and I'm really hoping that either the 2080 Super or the 2060 work because of that DLSS option when it comes to 4K gaming. So let's go ahead and just give it a shot. I'm just gonna start building in here and we'll see what happens. So let's kick things off with the motherboard and the CPU as usual. Now this board here does have Type-C support, which is nice. It also looks super duper sexy. Now this being a Zen 3 chip, we want to make sure that the motherboard in question has the appropriate BIOS installed. Otherwise, we won't get a post. I've double checked that. I actually had a previous CPU that I used to make sure that it would post with the newest one. Check the BIOS revision and we're good to go. Now, if you're new to this whole PC building thing, CPU installation is super simple. There's gonna be a white arrow on the board. That's gonna be our reference point. There's also a golden arrow on the CPU. You can see it right there at the bottom. We wanna align these two so they're facing the same direction. We're gonna lift the retention arm. If we're using an AM4 socket, it's actually pretty simple compared to the LGA sockets. We're gonna drop the CPU down. It's gonna slot into the little pinholes there in the socket itself. We've got the golden triangle facing the same direction as the white arrow. Lower the retention arm back down and we're good to go. Next, we're gonna install RAM. Pull back on these two locks here. We've got the notch in the middle. We're gonna align with the notch in each of the DIMMs. And yeah, pretty straightforward. Start with the one side, push hard, click, push on the other side. You hear that click, you're good to go. Same thing for the second module. Right next to it, click and click. So these here are the internals of the SilverStone case. You can see it's fairly hollow in here. However, we do not have any access to the underside of the motherboard once it's installed. So we'll need to get our AIO mounting gear situated on the motherboard first before we secure everything to the chassis. Okay, so I'm struggling to visualize the whole AIO aspect of this here. We've got so much tube length. Look at this, all this here. We don't need it, right? I mean, this is to accommodate obviously mid towers and the like. You want long enough tubes to reach the socket, but in a small form factor case like this excess tubing just gets in the way of everything else, and we're already gonna be tight on space as it is. I've tried with tubes on this side. I'm not even sure if we can mount it tube side up top because we have the front facing down right now. But I mean, these cables are in the way. You know, we could. It's something we could probably pull off if we kept fiddling with it, but honestly, the tube length alone is not looking too good right now. I'm kind of upset about that. So I think we're just gonna ditch the AIO and we're going to use the Noctua Cooler. Why not? So this here is the Noctua NH-L9A. It is designed specifically for the AM4 socket, which means that it will not work, to my knowledge, with any other socket layout out there. The way to design these coolers is that the hardware spacing is supposed to accommodate the cutouts for a specific socket type, and there's no way to interchange these because this cooler is already so compact. Adding modularity typically adds a bit of fluff to the overall dimensions of the cooler. So this is designed specifically, like I said, for AM4. And if you want the Intel equivalent, you'll have to search for the L9. I think they call it the L9i, or just type in NH-L9 Intel, and you'll see there's also an LJ1150X version of this cooler for Intel builds. Check out the packaging. I mean, that in and of itself has sold me. Noctua did a great job with this packaging detail here. And I think we should be pretty much, yeah, so this is just gonna screw directly into the stock backplate that you'll get with your AM4 motherboard. Never mind, ignore what I just said. They give us their own mounting hardware to use, no big deal. So what we're gonna do is start with the cooler upside down. I've got thermal paste applied on top of the CPU. It looks rather messy, but just roll with it. We're gonna flip the motherboard upside down and align the threads on the cooler with the cutouts in the motherboard. Then we're gonna use this back plate. We're gonna set it down like so. It might be upside down, but whatever. Then we're gonna use the 4 included screws, pass those through, and once we start locking this in, the cooler should tighten down to the CPU. Get that mounting pressure we're looking for. And once things are good and tight, go ahead and flip the motherboard back over, and you should have a pretty solid looking low profile cooler installed. This is actually not the side of the board that I thought the cable would be coming out of, but I think this might work if we can kind of route the cable along the side here, and then it'll connect into the CPU fan header right here. Nice. You can see just how low profile this cooler actually is. It barely exceeds the height of this rear I/O backplate that ASRock's integrated into this board. So looking really nice. It's gonna be perfect for most ITX kind of small form factor builds out there. Now we can install the motherboard, and we can actually just slide it in from the top. The rear I/O shield is integrated, so don't need to worry about that. And the board will sit, yep, just like that. And we're gonna lock it down with some screws. Now I did forget one important piece of this puzzle, and that is a storage drive. I made note of it earlier in the video. We're just gonna stick with M.2 drives here. I have an NVMe Gen 4 drive. It's an MP600 from Corsair that I'm gonna install. I think I'm just gonna use the Corsair heatsink. To be honest, there's really no advantage going with the stock
one included with the motherboard instead. So we're just gonna slide that in, and then we'll get a hold of that little screw there, and we'll just leave it like that. Next, we're gonna tackle front I/O and this mess of cables. We're gonna try to cable manage this stuff as we go because I'm just kind of, yeah, a bit concerned about space. We'll probably have a little bit of it up here now that we're not going with the AIO. But still, you don't want a rat's nest in front of the only intake fan we're gonna have in this system.
And I'd say that looks pretty good. Now we're gonna install the power supply. Well, Houston, we've got a bit of a problem here. Obviously, SFX dimensions are way different than ATX dimensions. This case only supports ATX style power supplies, and this is way too small for that. So this SFX power supply is actually really great considering its size, 750 watts, 80 plus platinum rated. It's fully modular, which is really cool. But you know, obviously you can't use this power supply without an adapter, and there is no adapter included in the power supplies box, nor is there one included in the case box, though I'd expect it less from the case, more so in the power supply box. Thankfully though, I did have an extra bracket from an old Corsair SFX power supply because Corsair includes them by default, and I didn't use it in the build that power supply went into. So we can use it here. It's just a bit of a shame that it's not included in the SilverStone box, and SilverStone sent both of these units expecting them to be combined, right, paired together. So I'm not sure how they thought we were going to pull it off without a bracket, but I have emailed them. I'll put a little note somewhere in the video with their response. Hopefully, if they weren't originally including brackets with this this SFX power supply, they will in the future, because I think it's important that you have that versatility in case you want to move this from an ITX build to an ATX build in the future. And here we go. Once the bracket's installed, it's pretty straightforward. Install from the top. The power supply is going to be pulling in air from the top. The top is ventilated, and it will exhaust it obviously out the rear. So it'll be a rather isolated system. It shouldn't affect temperatures too much from our CPU because we still have a good bit of our air cooler down here that's exposed, and it'll be getting most of its air from the front of the case anyway, because we'll have one large fan here set to intake to pull in fresh air from the front. I do think it was a good idea to go with an SFX power supply though for this particular case, just because we're gonna have a bit of excess cabling, and we're not gonna want all that to kind of get in the way of that intake fan at the front. So you know, if you can go with a smaller power supply, have that smaller footprint, you'll have a bit more space to work with. Of course, our car is going to take up this space here closer to the camera. So we're going to have to kind of just, I don't know, we'll try to keep the cables up here, although I'm not sure that's going to be possible. There's no mounting points or anything up here. But yeah, the less cabling, the better, the less of it gets in the way of that airflow coming in. Now, since we're using an NVMe drive, we don't need any extra cables apart from the 8-pin EPS, the dual 6+2 pins, supplemental PCIe power, and the 24 pins. So just 3 cables running from the power supply here. Quite nice. We'll run this cable into the CPU header here at the top, and we'll be good to go. Now at this point, I do want to test fit the graphics card. We actually only have the front intake fan to install, and that's pretty much it. Apart from that and the graphics card, we're going to be finished with this build. So it's been moving very nicely, but I have detached the front panel from the chassis just so we have a bit more breathing room for this card, because yeah, as you can see, we're gonna need it. So I'm thinking it'll fit. I don't I don't know for sure, but if I had to wager, I'd say we can get it to fit. Okay, so the card is installed now, and we're gonna go about reinstalling the front. Look at that. Look at that. This chassis is made for this 2080 Super. This is just a beautiful fit. Now I know you can't really tell, but there is maybe an 1/8 of an inch. That's probably, I would say, a few millimeters. That's all we've got, folks. That's it. That's the clearance. It actually extends past the frame itself. There is luckily a bit of space between the frame and the front panel, and that's where the end of that graphics card is resting nicely. So very, very happy to see that actually worked. And one of the last things to do, I'm gonna install this front intake fan. I'm gonna stick with Noctua here because we went with Noctua for the CPU cooler, and this fan in particular runs extremely quiet. Not too concerned about how it looks because, well, you're not gonna be able to see it through the front panel. And last up here, connecting supplemental PCIe power to the graphics card. So we've got one 8-pin. It's gonna go right on the very corner, and then the second 6-pin
This one should be pretty easy. All right, there we go. Let me tuck this extra 6-pin underneath.
And we should probably do something about this extra cabling. Just a consequence, again, of such a compact case, you're gonna have a bit of excess, and you're gonna wanna cable manage this because you don't want any of these getting snagged in either the front intake fan or the CPU fan. And here she is. I am actually surprised by how much space we have left over. We definitely could have fit that 120 mil AIO in here. In hindsight, we did have, you know, a bit of extra space to bend those tubes. Probably would have been a bit weird looking, but we could have made it happen. I'm not really surprised. SilverStone said it could be done. Obviously, they know their components. The only issue, though, with that is that an AIO is a closed system, right? So it's designed to only cool one specific thing. And as a result, we wouldn't have any active cooling at all on our MOSFETs, VRM, power delivery setup on the motherboard. And if we do a bit of overclocking, we obviously want some degree of cooling there. And we wouldn't really have that with just one intake fan blowing in hot air. I mean, you would. Any kind of air movement is a good thing, especially in these smaller cases, but having a fan actively blowing air, fresh air down onto the board is a good thing. So I think in hindsight, I'm glad that despite knowing we could have fit the AIO in here, we went with the conventional air cooler, a top flow air cooler instead.
A few moments later.
I am stupid.
I am stupid.
I just realized that this 2080 Super does not have HDMI 2.1 ports, and that's kind of needed for 4K 120 Hertz via HDMI. And the problem is the LG OLED TV we're going to be showcasing in a future video only has HDMI ports. Most modern TVs don't have display ports. It's just not, it's not as popular a connection standard in the TV space. And we talked about that in a dedicated video. Anyway, the 2080 Super isn't gonna work. There is the possibility of being able to like adapt it. You can go from DisplayPort 1.4 via adapter to HDMI 2.1, but there are only like 1 or 2 options available right now on Amazon, and none of them are gonna get here in time for the video. On top of that, the reviews are kind of sketchy. It's just kind of a nightmare to deal with. I'd rather have native HDMI 2.1 support. The only card that I have with HDMI 2.1 ports that will fit in this case, ironically, is an RX 6800 XT reference card, or whatever they call this. This is not what I expected to work. I thought this card would be too big considering it has 3 fairly large fans and our 2080 Super only has 2. But this is actually almost identical in terms of length to the 2080 Super, which means it should, in theory, at least on paper, fit in here. Sorry, my kids have friends over right now, and it's because I'm having to film this section of the video a bit later. So we're gonna swap this card out for this one real quick, and we'll reinstall drivers and hopefully be good to go. Sorry about that. You know what I just realized? The 6900 XT uses essentially the same cooler as the 6800 XT, and I have both. I've been sitting on both for a long time, just waiting to use these reference cards for something. I thought about giving them away, but I like to keep the founders or reference cards direct from NVIDIA and AMD just for recursive testing and things. It's nice to have at least one card of each launch to kind of fall back on if I ever need to gather some new data with new drivers or whatever. So that's why I've kept these 2, but I mean, we might as well use the 6900 XT if it'll fit, right? I mean, they're the same size card, same size cooler, so yeah, let's go big or go home. Now, quick note about power supplies. I know technically the AMD recommends an 850 watt unit for the 6900 XT and a 750 watt for the 6800 XT, so you're like, Greg, oh, what are you doing? You're breaking the rules. I think it will still be fine. If I notice any issues, if the system randomly shuts off or what have you, you can always drop back down to the 6800 XT. But I think that the additional 100 watt headroom that AMD wants you to have is for those kind of like intermittent power spikes that the 6900 XT probably has to a greater extent than the 6800 XT, because it's ideally and it's a better bin chip in the end, right? So it would be ideal to have a higher wattage unit to account for those sharper fluctuations in power draw, but I think that 750 watt is still enough. We're not going to be doing any like crazy overclocking or anything with the 5600 XT, which already sips on power. So I think that we have enough headroom for the graphics card. We'll see. I'll let you know in a few months if anything blows up. So we're going to disconnect PCIe cables, and we've got these 3 screws at the rear. The card should just slide. You know what? I need to disconnect the front panel as well so that we have a bit more room to shimmy this thing out. And I guess while we're here, we should also slide in the new card. Will it fit? I'm a little less sure about this one. Why does this seem so much? Why does it seem so much bigger? It should fit. Oh, you know what it is. We might have to cut this case a bit. Damn it.
Yeah, this isn't gonna work. Oh man, this sucks. I thought, we'll just, oh, this is so cringe. Yeah, I think it's stuck. It ain't going any further. Okay, we gotta pull it back out. Abort mission, abort mission.
And one haircut later, I have the RX 6800 reference card that I needed to make this work. It took me a while. I had to actually drive to my brother's house to pick this up. I had this in his system, so I upgraded his to a 60. I just put the 6900 XT in his rig. So a delightful little upgrade for him. And I have a card that is now thin enough to fit in the Silverstone case. So if you look at both the 6800 XT here in my right hand and the 6800 side by side, you can see that the 6800 XT is slightly thicker top to bottom, and that's because this is classified technically as a 2-slot card, or sorry, 2.5 slot card, whereas the 6800 is a true 2-slot card. So the height of the shroud doesn't exceed the height of the rear I/O bracket here at the rear. So that's important. Of course, the height clearance was what was keeping us from installing the 6800 XT to begin with, or the 6900 XT. Anyway, too many cards to deal with here. But yeah, let's go ahead and get this thing installed.
And you know what? This actually works out, I guess, from a performance perspective as well, because the 6800, I mean, just the vanilla 6800 non-XT variant of this new lineup of cards from AMD is much more powerful than the 2080 Super we were going with to begin with. So look at that. Clips right in, no clearance issues left to right. So that's an important note here. This SG13B-C, whatever Silverstone calls this is only good for true 2-slot cards. If your card is wider than a true 2-slot, even by a few millimeters, it will not fit. The clearances aren't there. You might be able to get away with it if it's a shorter card front to back, but the thickness tolerances here are very tight. Does this feel like deja vu to anyone else? I really feel like I've done this before. And we'll get these PCIe cables connected. Shouldn't be any issues at all with power delivery now that we've dropped down to a 6800. So the 750 watt in here should be more than enough. I really should have connected the other cable first.
Also, I've got to say, wow, this triple fan layout really looks good in this compact case. And we'll slide the cover back on. Somehow, some way. There's a way to do this. There we go. That seems a little bit more like it. I am DDUing right now. I should have done that before I installed the new card, but yeah, do as I say, not as I do. And just like that, we are back online. Thank you all very much for watching this far into the video. I know this probably isn't how you expected it to end. This was just, I mean, it's something I really didn't expect going into it, and you always tend to have at least 1 or 2 surprises when it comes to small form factor builds, which I like. I mean, it's you know, it adds an extra bit of depth, an extra layer to the PC building process, because you have to think a bit outside the box, no pun intended. And you know, it's one of those things you should be very careful about. If you buy a bunch of hardware expecting it all to work, you know, just fine, only to realize that there are actual physical clearance issues, you can't really do anything about those unless you're willing to cut through your case, Dremel things, and yeah, I don't think you'd want to Dremel your card, but your case you'd surely have to make some of these larger cards work in builds like these. So just be very wary of that. You know, if anything, this video is a testament to how difficult it can be at times, and that's my fault, lack of preparation. I didn't really think this through, and also the fact that I completely skipped over the HDMI 2.1 requirement for 4K 120 OLED TVs via HDMI. So yeah, that's all fixed now. Thankfully, the 6800 has HDMI 2.1 support, and we're gonna be able to pair that with an ultra high speed HDMI cable. You don't wanna be limited by your cable either, and there are certain cable requirements. So there's high speed HDMI, and then there's ultra high speed HDMI, and ultra is the standard that you'll need to get that full 4K 120 hertz. I think up to like 8K 60, some compression, and 10K even. So HDMI can actually do quite a bit now, but the standard for most computers, I mean, the one that's very reliable and has a lot of breathing room, is still DisplayPort. It's just unfortunate that TVs haven't taken on that trend yet. So anyway, I'm gonna get this thing yeah, all lined up, and we're gonna put it underneath the TV in time for that LG video. If you guys like this video, thumbs up, be sure to subscribe, leave a comment down below, let me know how silly I am, and I'll catch you in the next one. My name is Greg, thanks for building with me.